Hey folks, back with another video. Let's dive into what stories got my attention today. Starting with the Ethiopia's quote unquote civil war. Well, I would just call it civil war at this moment. Hundreds of people have been killed since fighting began on November 4th, and more than 41,000 refugees have fled to Sudan, and there are reports of militias targeting civilians. Quote, I expressed my great concern regarding increasing ethnic targeted violence, numerous casualties, and violations of human rights and of international humanitarian law. End quote. Joseph Borrell said late on Tuesday after speaking to Ethiopia's foreign minister. Ethiopia has described the fighting as an internal law and enforcement matter, a position Prime Minister Abiy Ahmed reiterated in a statement on Wednesday, quote, we reject any interference in our internal affairs, end quote, he said. Borrell signaled his support for the African Union bloc's attempt to mediate, quote, that is the only way forward to avoid further destabilization, end quote, he said. With global alarm rising fast, European nations raised the conflict at a closed-doors meeting of the United Nations Security Council on Tuesday, diplomats said. Members of the council expressed concern, diplomats said, but South Africa, Niger, and Tunisia urged more time for regional mediation efforts before the council considers action. In Somalia, Ethiopia has disarmed several hundred Tigrayans in an AU peacekeeping force fighting Al-Qaeda-linked militants. 3 soldiers of Tigrayan ethnicity were also sent home from a UN peacekeeping force in South Sudan, a diplomatic and security source told Reuters on Wednesday. The UN mission in South Sudan said it was aware of 3 soldiers' repatriation and that its Human Rights Division was following up. Although Ethiopia is ultimately responsible for the conduct and movement of the roughly 2,000 troops it had in South Sudan, the statement said, discrimination due to ethnicity could violate international law. Bilen Seyom, a spokeswoman for the Ethiopian Prime Minister's office, told Reuters that the situation in South Sudan, quote, would be the same, end quote, as Somalia, meaning soldiers sent home were under investigation for links to the TPLF. On Tuesday, Ethiopia's state-appointed human rights watchdog accused a Tigrayan youth group of killing about 600 civilians as federal and local forces both claimed advances in the war. Reuters have been unable to verify statements made by either side since phone and internet connections to Tigray are down and access to the area is strictly controlled. Additionally, petrol has been rationed in Tigray since the conflict began. Now, the Ethiopian civil war is going to rage on first as the military conflict, which we see happening right now. And I believe that once the military conflict ends, there would be a continuation of this civil war by other means, meaning the civil war will have an effect in the form of there will be low trust, and that the Tigrayans in particular will feel persecuted whether the Ethiopian government intends to persecute them or not. Every slight will be taken, let's just say, they will just make a mountain out of a molehill in the coming, even at the end of this conflict. Anyhow, moving on over into the Middle East, and the Israeli airstrike, the Israeli Air Force conducted airstrikes in Syria overnight, which killed at least 8 fighters operating in pro-Iran militias, a UK-based activist group said on Wednesday. Now, the strikes targeted an arms depot and a position held by Iranian forces and their Lebanese ally Hezbollah near the capital Damascus, and a pro-Iranian militia position in southern Syria, the Syrian Observatory for Human Rights said. Now, of course, the nationalities of the dead fighters was not immediately known, the observatory said. Syrian state media, Sana, earlier said an airstrike by the quote-unquote the Zionist enemy, had hit an area quote south of Damascus end quote just before midnight local time. Sana also reported another strike against the village of Ruwayhina in the southern province of Quneitra near the Israeli-occupied Golan Heights without reporting any casualties from either attack. Now, the Israeli army rarely acknowledges individual strikes and refused to comment when contacted by AFP on Wednesday. Israel has carried out hundreds of air and missile strikes on Syria, targeting government troops as well as Iranian and Hezbollah forces which support President Bashar al-Assad's government. Last week, Israeli warplanes struck Iranian targets in Syria in what the Israeli army called a retaliatory attack for what it said were explosive devices found near one of its bases on the Golan Heights. Sana said those strikes had killed 3 Syrian soldiers, while the observatory said 7 Allied foreign fighters also died. On Saturday night, airstrikes killed 14 pro-Iran militia groups from Iraq and Afghanistan in eastern Syria, the observatory said, adding they were likely Israeli air raids. Now, personally, I am against any country going into another country to bomb them as a matter of principle, because I believe such bombings will result in more blowback and sorrow in the long run. And of course, this damages the reputation and any sort of credibility to maintain peace in the future. If Israel continues to act like this, it will create more future grievances for itself and also a international reputation hit, even though it might not be every country. But if Syria and Lebanon and various other countries just look at these actions and they say they could just be stubborn and say we're not going to make any deal in such a circumstance. And I believe that the Israeli government ought to figure out a way to, let's just say, entice the Syrians, the Lebanese into making a deal with a let's just say a deal with, how should I say it, like a credible deal. That's it. They need to figure out a way to make a deal that is credible. And these kind of, bombing raids are in effect, I believe, hurting Israel in the long run. Moving on into Afghanistan, a double explosion in the central Afghan province of Bamiyan claimed 23 lives and injured 58 others, a spokesperson at the Afghan Ministry of Interior confirmed. Quote, about 4:40 p.m. today, 2 large quantities of explosives were detonated in front of the Insaf market in the Bazaar area of Three-Way Street in Bamiyan, killing a traffic officer and 13 civilians, end quote, Tariq Aryan told The National. Quote, the 2 explosives took place in less than a kilometer apart. There is a lot of damage and the casualty numbers might rise, end quote, said Mohammad Raza Yusufi, the Bamiyan police spokesman, still at the scene 2 hours after the blast. The attack came as the international community pledged billions to support the country over the next 4 years after a plea from the Afghan president Ashraf Ghani. Now, this is the first such attack in the province since the fall of Taliban regime in 2001, Mr. Yusufi said. The central province, largely populated by the Afghan Hazara Shia majority, was considered one of few safe places in Afghanistan. Bamiyan city, known for the large Buddha statues that were destroyed by the Taliban just months before their fall, is a popular tourist destination for locals as well as international tourists. The Taliban spokesman Zabiullah Mujahid denied responsibility and condemned the attacks on social media platforms. But the insurgent group has increased violence in the past year despite making a deal with the US administration this year. Personally, I don't see peace in Afghanistan irrespective of whether the West stays or leaves Afghanistan. I believe the problem of Afghanistan is a combination that stems from the fact that it has low education, coupled with the people having a short term thinking. They want quick, you know, they just want they want the things quick. They cannot delay gratification. That's the word. Anyway, security and rule of law are something that the Afghan government cannot provide credibly. And until the Afghan government does not work to have a a government that has its root in the will and consent of the people, the country will be plagued with one kind of problem or another. And this terrorism is just a manifestation of the past failures that are catching up. Moving on to the Caucasus region and to see how the deal is holding up, the Azerbaijani army has entered the Kalabajar region, one more territory ceded by the Armenian forces. Now, the ceasefire brokered by Russia 2 weeks ago stipulated that Armenia hand over control to Azerbaijan of some areas it hold outside Nagorno-Karabakh's borders. The first one, Agdam, was turned over last week. Kalbajar was expected to be handed over on November 15, but Azerbaijan agreed to delay the takeover after a request from Armenia. Azerbaijani officials said worsening weather conditions made the withdrawal of Armenian forces and civilians difficult along the single road through mountainous territory that connects the region with Armenia. Footage on the Wednesday showed Azerbaijani troops slowly moving through snowy terrain, looking for mines. Quote, engineering work has been completed to ensure the movement of our units in this direction. The difficult mountain roads along the route to the troops movement are being cleared of mines and prepared for use, end quote, the Azerbaijani Defense Ministry said. Now, ahead of the handover, some ethnic Armenians leaving Kalbajar set their houses on fire in a bitter farewell gesture. Now, this reminds me of the saying, if I can't have it, then neither can you. However, I believe the peace deal is still holding. But I do not see the two sides trying to work out their issues. I mean, I don't see it out in the open. Maybe they are working behind the scene, and if they are, then I wish such efforts all the luck. Moving on over to Thailand, where the Thai anti-government activists have planned to rally Wednesday outside one of country's largest banks, of which King Maha Vajiralongkorn is the biggest shareholder, in the latest show of defiance to the monarch. The protesters had shifted from earlier plans to protest at the office of the Crown Property Bureau, the agency that manages the monarchy's assets, after reports that there would be a heavy police presence as well as a counter rally of soldiers and royalists at the site. The Free Youth Protest Group announced the change of plan on its Facebook page late Tuesday, which instructed protesters to gather at the headquarters of Siam Commercial Bank on Wednesday afternoon instead of at Bangkok's Democracy Monument for a march to the office of the Crown Property Bureau. Police mobilized dozens of vehicles to the bank's headquarters on Wednesday following the protesters' announcement. The police said on Tuesday that around 6,000 officers would be deployed to the Crown Property Bureau's office to ensure protesters do not get near it. Now, personally, I am amazed at the fact that the protests have lasted this long in the current environment, namely the whole pandemic, that is, and the government hasn't been, let's just say, overly like they haven't been overly strict with the protests, let's just say. I mean, in the past, the government cracked down on protesters much more harshly, and this time they have not been, I believe, as harsh as last time. But the coming days and weeks are going to be, I believe, very important in the whole protest versus the government saga. Anyway, that's it for this video. If you liked the video, then hit that like button and hit that subscribe button for future updates. Write in the comment sections your thoughts, criticism, and anything I might have missed. And I will see you in the next video.